So this is why you have a lot of kids in high school that go, man, school ain't for me. And yet, they are brilliant, but it may be brilliant in just different ways. But we have to put them in this specific box. And then we say, if you don't fit within this box, you are not worthy. You are not human enough for us to regard. And then what happens? Because they don't get that diploma, and now because they don't get the certificate of completion, well, guess what? If you're not worthy enough for school, then you're not worthy enough for employment, which subjects them even further to economic disparity. So there are many people in this state and many people throughout this country who deal with having a family member who might have a disability. And sometimes it's a physical disability, sometimes it's an intellectual disability, or sometimes it's both. And in the system that we live in, it is already challenging to deal with as it is. Unfortunately, because of the system that we live in, your value is seen at what you can or cannot produce. And so, because of that, people who don't produce as much as the average person does within a capitalist system, they are deemed less worthy, even though a life is a life. And so, because of this, then people who may have a family member that may suffer from an intellectual, physical disability, or both, are typically overlooked. They are not regarded as important because, in their eyes, they do not contribute as much to society in their eyes. And so I think this is a very important topic to get into because they do not get paid attention to as much as they should. Their voices are not amplified as much. You may have different people who have these different conditions, ailments, disabilities, different abilities, and they are invisible until we see them, maybe at an event, maybe at an outing, at a family gathering, something, and then we finally pay attention. But day to day, we don't. I'm going to give you a little story before we begin and why I'm talking about this. So, in my high school years, I was recruited to go to a magnet high school so that I can pursue a trade and then go into that field. And then once I'm done learning that trade, I can go straight into the industry without even having to go into college. And that was the more economically viable path for me because I didn't want to end up with student debt like my mother did. And so that's what I did. And this was this small high school. Our student body was somewhere around 210 to 220 students. That's the entire student body. And it was only juniors and seniors in that school. It was called Career Academy High School. And the high school itself was located in a technical vocational school here in Orlando. And so I had my four basic subjects. You know, I had my math subject, my science, my history, and in English. And then my electives were the trade that I was going into, which was for me was commercial foods and culinary arts. But in doing so, because I needed transportation to get to and from class, the bus that we would take wouldn't be a regular school bus due to, you know, budgeting issues with the school board. So instead, it would be a two stop. So we would get picked up along with the students that were disabled at the local high school. So the students that were disabled, and a lot of time they would be physically and or intellectually disabled, we would pick them up as well. And so we would be on the same bus as them. We would get dropped off at our magnet high school, and then they would get dropped off at the regular public school. So we would daily see our fellow students from another school who are disabled. And so being around them, it humanizes them, and you don't see them just as an afterthought. You don't see them as an other. One of those students, I'm not going to say his name because for privacy reasons, went to the same church as I did. And so I knew him before I knew the rest of his family. Sweet kid, sweet kid. Well, he's a grown man now. We're basically the same age, but he has an intellectual disability. And so because of that, I got to see the human side of him. And that's important, that we see ourselves in other people, right? Including those who may have physical and or intellectual disabilities within our own country. And it's for this very reason why there's a sense of outrage with the story. And so this is why I want to talk about this. Because this isn't just a moral issue, this is also a class issue that we need to talk about. So I want to get into this story here. And I hope that you stick around for this because I think it is that important. Here we go. This is a story that says Florida will phase out certificates of completion for students with disabilities. Now, this came out just a few days ago. Let's get into this. And this is local to the state of Florida, but this can also happen to other states. So goes Florida, can go and then replace the state with Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, Arizona. It can go to Pennsylvania. It can go to Nebraska. It can go to Illinois. Just name a state. So let's read and get into this. So the Florida Board of Education voted to sunset certificates of completion for students with disabilities who attend K through 12 schools in the state. These certificates were awarded to students who couldn't complete the coursework needed for a diploma. Under new Florida law, HB 1105, and the board's vote, students with disabilities will no longer be able to get a certificate of completion at the end of their school career starting this year. Students with severe disabilities who can't earn a standard high school diploma will leave school without any formal recognition upon graduation. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little overly sensitive. But because their threshold of learning is lower than those of us who are average students, then shouldn't the threshold to graduate also be lower? And is it really a effort issue? Is it an issue of they just don't want to? Or is it an issue that their threshold is lower, so therefore we refuse to meet the needs of those at a lower threshold cognitively? And so this has bigger implications because just from the moral aspect, it's like, okay, they were able to complete this they were able to not complete this coursework. But at the same time, who are you comparing them to? Because not everybody's at the same level, even just in average classes. And so, what are we doing for those students too? Let's continue. It says Amy Van Bergen ran the Down Syndrome Association of Central Florida and is also the mom of a son with disabilities. She said her son, Wills, wouldn't have been able to get the 2 jobs he works at a law office without his certificate, and she's worried for other students like him. People with disabilities already have a higher rate of unemployment and a lower rate of job placement after school. Now, without a certificate of completion, securing employment could be even harder. So now we get into the economic aspect of this issue. Because now that they can no longer get a certificate of completion, some of these students who may have an intellectual disability, there are varying levels of intellectual disability. It's not just one set stagnant level. Some may have a slight intellectual disability, but because they have that slight intellectual disability, it doesn't mean they still can't work. It doesn't mean that they still can't produce and provide for themselves in an economic way. And the problem is now that you're taking that certificate of completion away from them, now you're going to subject them even further to a life of deeper poverty and unemployment. And so then once they get to that, once they get to homelessness, then what are you going to do? Because their crime is that they have an intellectual disability and you didn't want to give them a certificate of completion. So now, because you're phasing out that certification, now employers are not going to want to hire them. And it's already hard enough because an employer will look at a certificate of completion against a diploma, and they're going to pick the diploma. But now we're even in a state of economic contention where now you look at college students with master's degrees are having a hard time finding a job now. So now you're making it even harder for the most disenfranchised among us. And the question is, if we are truly for the working class, does it mean all the working class, including ones that may have some intellectual disabilities or may have some physical disabilities? Are we for the true, all the working class, or are we just for the ones who seem normal? See, this is what pisses me off about some people on the left that are like, oh, just be normal. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to be normal? What does it mean? Does it mean to be within the confines of certain ideas pushed on us by a capitalist system? Because we have to be seen as productive according to them, when in reality, if it's not hurting nobody, why we need to be normal? If it's not hurting nobody, if it's not disenfranchising anybody. That's the question I ask. Let's continue on. It says without a certificate, they're potentially going to lose eligibility to all sorts of opportunities after high school, whether that's even taking a college placement test or pursuing developmental or vocational programs. Van Bergen says she's worried students with disabilities who can't earn a standard diploma and who now won't be able to earn a certificate of completion could be ineligible to participate in graduation ceremonies like other kids. Ultimately, she says this could take away some of the incentives these students have to complete school at all. Because it's like, well, if you can't even earn a diploma, well, and it's really just what it does, it places everybody on the same plane when not everybody cognitively is on the same plane. That's just like when somebody says, oh, you should learn to code. Some of us may not have the same capacity or bandwidth for learning to code as others, because some of us may be stronger in other areas that might be less concrete. And that's okay, because the human brain varies in different degrees. There is not one specific type of intelligence. And this is one of the biggest issues. Some people think that intelligence is just this one specific standard. There are multiple different kinds of intelligence. There, and I mean this in a way of praising, and I hope it doesn't come off. I don't mean it to be backhanded or anything, but, and he's been honest about this before. Comrade on RBN, Rome, has admitted that he didn't finish high school. Yet this is one of the smartest brothers I know. Because the problem is the system did not acclimate to the way he learned. It expects students to acclimate to the system instead of the system acclimating to the students. So this is why you have a lot of kids in high school that go, man, school just ain't for me. And yet, they are brilliant, but it may be brilliant in just different ways. But we have to put them in this specific box. And then we say, if you don't fit within this box, you are not worthy. You are not human enough for us to regard. And then what happens? Because they don't get that diploma, and now because they don't get the certificate of completion, well, guess what? If you're not worthy enough for school, then you're not worthy enough for employment, which subjects them even further to economic disparity. And this is even higher when you go to different groups like Black and brown people, right? Because white supremacy is still a thing. And so the problem is that we have a system where they try to fit everybody into this neat little box. And the school system at its present form is more focused on obedience and conformity rather than mindfulness and critical thinking. It's really great for people who can just retain information and then just spit it back out. But what about the people who analyze things in their head and go, wait a minute, this ain't right, that ain't right, that ain't right, this doesn't make sense. How does this make sense? How is this congruent? How do these converge? And then because you don't go according to the regiment or the curriculum that the school wants you to, then, oh, well, you're too much of a radical. You have to go. No, do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You can go and get your GED maybe in a couple of years, but outside of that, no, you're not good enough. And this is part of education system that is built with a capitalist model. I am all for public education. This is why the system needs to change in order to make public education public education. Public education isn't public education in this system. Public education is capitalist education. because they want you to be good little workers. That's it. And now the people who can't measure up to what they want to be good little workers that conform to the capitalist mode of production, well, guess what? If you can't reach that right where we need you, then guess what? Instead of, what's the word I want to use? Instead of tailoring it to, okay, we know you can't reach to this part, but for your category, can you reach to this part? Instead of doing that, they just throw you out completely. And they say you're no longer worthy. And it's sick. It's a sick system. Because they are people too. They are lives. I can't tell you how many people who I met who dropped out of high school who are brilliant. Like, do me a favor, after the stream, go to the RBN Roundtable and listen to Rome's analysis about geopolitics. He has a better analysis than me, and I finished high school. This is the problem with the education system that we have, is that it doesn't conform to the way kids learn. We all do not have the same type of brains. Look at people who are on the spectrum, who may be neurodivergent. They may even be nonverbal, but they can figure things out way faster than the rest of us can. But that's just because their brain is different. But you know what's interesting about that? The capitalists, if they can't utilize it to make profit off of, then they are not going to see that person as worthy. That's the problem. And the school system is under the purview and under the oversight of who? The government. And who is running our government? It ain't us. It's the corporate parasites, the parasite class. And they're the ones that run our school governments. Our school systems under our government. And so some of your kids are seen as not worthy. This was brought up by Amanda Seales during her debate with Black conservatives. And yes, this is true. They will actually do tests, school standardized tests for kids in the 3rd grade. And they use those test scores to judge how many beds and how many cells that they will need for prisons in order to know, okay, we got this many kids that are below this level. Guess what? They're going to be most likely to end up in our prison. So guess what? We know that we're going to be making money off of those kids. We're going to be incarcerating them. And that's the sick part of the system. All right, let's continue on. Says the whole disillusion of certificates of completion absolutely disproportionately harms students with disabilities. So rather than helping bridge that educational disparity gap, it is only going to widen it. Why on earth should these students attend school? The Florida Department of Education says the focus will now be on alternate pathways to completing high school diploma, and this change is needed to ensure students receive appropriate support and recognition for their achievements. The change is an outlier in legislative session that otherwise championed the rights of students and people with disabilities. Senate President Ben Albritton made increasing the support and services available to people with disabilities the focus of the last session. Though laws passed last session, Governor Ron DeSantis and a Republican majority legislator not only increased early detection and intervention for students who have autism, but also created micro-credential for teachers who work with students on the spectrum. Now, here's one thing I will agree with, right? Increasing early detection and intervention for students who have autism and create micro-credential for teachers who work with students on the spectrum. Basically, as long as you are trying to acclimate so that they can actually learn while still embracing the different type of mind that they have, okay, right? But some people want to just cart them off into an institution or get them away, right? Which is essentially what, some people want to do. And so it's like, is there a better thing? And part of me thinks that it would be better instead to give them that certificate of completion. And on top of that, find the different ways that they learn and recondition the school system to acclimate to that. I'm blanking on the name of the talk, but there was this educator that basically talked. It was Sir Ken Robinson. And it was, oh my gosh, I almost had it. But basically, he was speaking about when it comes to public education, we're going to watch it. We're going to watch it because I think it's that important. I should have had it primed up, but I just thought about it just until now. But let's take a look at this. Let's see. No. Changing education paradigms. That's what it's called. Now, this came out 14 years ago. I hope that people get a lot out of this, but this actually goes into what I was trying to explain, and he does it a lot more succinctly than I ever can. So I will also link this in the chat for you guys, but I think this is absolutely brilliant, and I agree with him on this. So let's go. Oh, hang on. Sound up.
Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that? Given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating. How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out, how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle? The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which was if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job.
Boom. That's also another thing. Like, we were millennials. Come to the front, millennials. Because that's what we were told. Remember in the movie Accepted, it was with Justin Long. His dad said, if you want a good life, if you want a job, you go to college. If you want to be seen as basically valuable to society, you go to college, right? And he was resisting that, right? Because not everybody, college isn't for everybody, right? But that's basically what we were taught. And now, as we can see, even people with master's degrees are having a hard time even finding a job in a field where, number one, they're well overqualified for. And that's one of the flaws of the capitalist system. Let's continue.
Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having a degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. Some people say we have to raise standards as if this is a breakthrough. You know, like, really, yes, we should. Why would you lower them? You know, I mean, I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. Mm-hmm. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, you know, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children to benefit from public education. They're incapable of learning to read and write, and why are we spending time on this? So there's also built into it a whole series of assumptions about social structure and capacity.
So let's talk about class, right? Based on your class, you're either worthy of education or not. And I feel this coming back up again in certain ways, that some of us are being seen as worthy of education, whereas some of us are not seen as worthy. See what I mean? And so it's really a dehumanization. And it's part of this anti-intellectual sphere that we're having, right? And the people who typically push the anti-intellectualism are people who went to college, went to universities. But they want people to be anti-intellectual so that they can keep it amongst themselves. So then they can say, well, I got an education, so I'm worthy. And they'll do this, you know? And it's not to say that going to college or anything like that makes you better. It should be open to everybody without a barrier. And if they wish, they can go through that formal process, or if they want to do it through an informal process, it could be available to them through free education areas like a public library. I also think that I think education should be free overall, because if people have access to it, then they can actually learn more, which is part of why, you know, it's so important that we have this internet age, because it actually is opening a lot of avenues towards people now having more knowledge at their fingertips. The only problem is there's some misinformation and disinformation that's also among that as well. And so some people may pick up on the disinformation and misinformation and think they take that as actual fact. And that's part of the issue too. But I think education really should be free for everybody. Let's continue.
Driven by an economic imperative of the time, but running right through it was an intellectual model of the mind, which was essentially the Enlightenment view of intelligence. That real intelligence consists in the capacity for a certain type of deductive reasoning and a knowledge of the classics originally, what we come to think of as academic ability. And this is deep in the gene pool of public education, that there are really two types of people, academic and non-academic, smart people and non-smart people. And the consequence of that is that many brilliant people think they're not, because they've been judged against this particular view of the mind.
Oh, baby, that's where it is. And the problem is that some people, like for instance, you guys remember, have you guys ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting? Great movie. Matt Damon, Robin Williams, Ben Affleck. Is it Bill Skarsgård or Alexander Skarsgård? I forget, but I know it's one of them. It's a Mini Driver. There's a lot of people in that movie, that are really famous now. But basically, it talks about Will Hunting is basically a kid that's from a working class background. I would argue working poor. And he is brilliant mathematician. But at the same time, he can't get out of his own way. But he's a brilliant mathematician. But he also works at working class jobs. And so despite him being brilliant, people will look down on him, seeing him, working on a moving truck, or see him working as a barista or something like that. And they will look down on him, not thinking that he's that smart. When in reality, he can run circles around the people in these universities. And so the thing is, like, just because somebody has a certain occupation or a certain manner of speaking doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. This is why I talk about there's multiple different types of intelligence. The problem is that we box people into what we deem as intelligence. All right, let's continue.
So we have twin pillars, economic and intellectual. And my view is that this model has caused chaos in many people's lives. It's been great for some. There have been people who have benefited wonderfully from it. But most people have not. Mm-hmm. Instead, they suffer this. This is the modern epidemic, and it's as misplaced and it's as fictitious. This is the plague of ADHD. Now, this is a map of the incidence of ADHD in America, or prescriptions for ADHD. Don't mistake me here. I don't mean to say there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. I'm not qualified to say if there is such a thing. I know that a great majority of psychologists and pediatricians think there is such a thing, but it's still a matter of debate. What I do know for a fact is it's not an epidemic. These kids are being medicated as routinely as we had our tonsils taken out, and on the same whimsical basis and for the same reason, medical fashion. Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalizing them now for getting distracted. From what? Boring stuff at school, for the most part. It seems to me it's not a coincidence totally that the incidence of ADHD has risen in parallel with the growth of standardized testing. Now, these kids are being given Ritalin and Adderall and all manner of things, often quite dangerous drugs, to get them focused and calm them down. But according to this, attention deficit disorder.
So, and I'm not going to watch this entire thing, but it's also a means to make them more focused so that they will be what? Because it's for training you to be in the workplace, to follow the boss and just do what he says, instead of having critical thinking and thinking to yourself, well, why in the world do we have a system where we go into a totalitarian type of structure, an institution, and we spend 8 hours plus per day, and we don't have a democratic say in this area in our lives? And yet we talk about all manners of, oh, we should have more democracy. And yet we don't do that. So when you start to think critically, right, and outside of the box, that box being capitalism, then you start to go, wait, this isn't right. Now it makes you think, why in the world did Ronald Reagan create a financial barrier for public college? Why did he start, pushing for tuitions to be paid in college when he was governor of California? Because he doesn't want people to think critically, because that means that we would question this system even more. And now who runs our government? The parasite class. And part of our government is the school board, the departments of education. And they don't want us to think critically, because that thinking critically puts what at risk? Their power. So the thing is that this is one of the reasons why I think, and he gets deeper into this about why it's better that we should be acclimating to the way that kids learn, which I fully am on board with. And he said we shouldn't be anesthetizing children. We should be waking them up to what's inside them, and basically saying that, look, if you have a kid that learns better, either in small groups or alone, then we should acclimate our public education for that group of kids. You have some kids that learn better in the evening than they do in the morning. We should acclimate to that group of kids. We have some kids that learn, and why also, let me ask you this question. Why don't we have school that goes according to the biological circadian rhythm of kids going through puberty? Because as soon as puberty starts, guess what? Mornings are not good. Once 11, 12, 13 hits, guess what? You do not want to wake up anything before 11 a.m. Anybody got teenagers? They do. Look, give them a day off. You will not see them until 11, 12, 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Because biologically, their circadian rhythm is changing because their bodies are changing. So therefore, why in the world don't we have high school starting at maybe at the earliest 10:30 in the morning? Because a lot of times the circadian rhythm, because of their hormone changes, keeps them up late. This is why some teenagers will be up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. But then we'll punish them for being up that late because their circadian rhythm is changed. We'll punish them for something that's naturally occurring instead of acclimating to the way kids learn, because we want them to be good little workers. That's why. And then guess what? They're tired, they're sleepy, their brains aren't even awake, and then we expect them to be able to pass a class. And also, I want you to take a look. What's their first period and second period class? And then look at their grades. And why are kids suddenly drinking coffee at 11, 12, 13, 14 years old? Why are they liking iced coffee so much now? Back in the day, coffee was an adult drink. We didn't drink no damn coffee. And now you got kids going, oh my God, I need my Starbucks. Why? That don't make no damn sense. Because we're trying to acclimate kids to be productive workers for who? Not for the rest of society. It's for the Peter Thiels and the Elon Musks and the Bill Gates and the Mark Zuckerbergs. That's who we're doing it for. It's not for us. It's not for the collective. This is why it's a class issue. Let's get back into this article, because I don't want us to get away from this affecting kids who are disabled. It says the legislator also created a new credential with students that disabilities that can earn after completing their work placement. These credentials or badges can be used to seek post-graduation employment, like a certificate of completion. It's like it's by any other name. God. It says in an additional statement after our story was published, Florida Department of Education wrote, they said it is important to clarify that Florida has expanded diploma pathways for students, including students with disabilities. With these pathways, Florida graduation rate for students reached 89.7% for the 23-24 school year and has increased year over year. Only 2% of students in this cohort receive a certificate of completion. Florida law provides multiple pathways to receive a standard diploma, ensuring students earn meaningful credentials upon completing high school. A standard diploma through traditional 24 credit option with supports and accommodations as needed, an academic and employment-based diploma option, which allows students to earn credit through combination of academic coursework and employment experiences, a standard diploma through alternate academic achievement standards, and alternate assessment with modifications, supports, and accommodations, which is available for students with significant cognitive disabilities, and an 18 credit academically challenging curriculum to enhance learning pathways, or Excel, with a focus on core academic content areas. An 18 credit career and technical education graduation pathway for students to receive additional career preparation prior to graduation. In Florida, we are proud to be the education state and prioritize successful outcomes for all students, including students with disability. So my thing is, like, I'm hoping that I think that they should get a certificate of completion. But the thing is, like, look, if you're trying to vary the diploma so that there are different types of diplomas for those who have different, cognitive disabilities, I mean, okay. But at the same time, I just do not want any kids to fall through the cracks. And this ends up affecting them economically in the future, because it's not fair. It's not fair that they were born with an intellectual disability. So why should we push them to the margins for something that is out of their control? You see what I mean? That's my thing. And so I think that it's important that we continue to follow this, because as long as the system continues, it's never going to truly be beneficial towards these kids on a human level. Because within a system that values capital over people, when it values profits and property over people, the people always suffer. And this includes our students, and even more so those with intellectual disabilities. So when it comes to looking at the marginalized, just please continue to also have solidarity with our students that are marginalized in these areas too, because ultimately they grow up and they become part of the proletariat too. And if we are serious about solidarity with all workers, if we're serious about having solidarity with all people, this includes them too. And do what you can to see yourself within them. So then, yeah, they can also have liberation.